Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is Ron's Amazing Stories, where we play tales to take you away from today. And do we have a doggone good show for you today? Jason Dowd is back, and we talk about the cryptid, the Dogman. We also share 2 stories about the eerie beast sent in by you guys.
Jolly good timing.
I thought so. Next, we have part 2 of the Diamond Thunderbolt by Thompson Rich. What else does our diamond smuggler have to tell us? We find that out today. But first, I have something new. I call it the 2.5 minute mystery. Check it out.
Another 5-minute mystery.
This 5-minute mystery is being brought to you by Reader's Digest, that classic magazine that was first published in 1922. What you'll hear today is one of their closed-room mysteries that people found so intriguing. Let's get to our story. First, let me set the scene for you. Mary Smith's body lies at the bottom of a multi-story building. It looks as if though she has committed suicide by jumping from one of the floors. Police Detective Danny O'Leary arrives. He heads to each floor of the building, opens a closed window, and flips a coin towards the street below. He goes to the second floor and does the exact same thing. He repeats this until he's been to each floor of the building. When he comes back down, he states,
"This was murder and not suicide."
How did he know that? Did you catch the clue? The answer is simple. If you listen to all the clues, you know that all the windows were closed and that he had to open them to toss his coins. If she had jumped from the window, wouldn't it still be open? Simple logic. So this not-so-5-minute mystery was brought to you by Reader's Digest, May 1922. Well, I have to say, we have more mail. This one comes from Maria Abbott, who lives in the UK. She writes, "Love the show and want more. How do you find these great stories, and can anyone do it?" I guess the smart answer is to say, nope. The only place you can get Ron's Amazing Stories is at Ron's Amazing Stories. Sorry, that's just the way it is. But the truth is, anyone and anyone's brother has access to the stories that we tell. In fact, if you're listening to this, you have access. There is a collection of great old programs and public domain stories at the Internet Archive. It is a non-profit library of millions of free books, movies, software, music, and much, much more. You literally can spend hours upon hours combing through the archives, and you'll never see everything. On its homepage, it boasts search the history of over 427 billion pages of the Internet. The Internet Archive was founded by Brewster Kahle in 1996 and is located in San Francisco. At first, it only stored information from one local network hub. In late 1999, the organization started to grow to include text, audio, moving images, and software, as well as archived web pages. It also began to distribute and provide specialized services for adaptive reading and informational access for the blind. In 2007, it was designated as a true library by the state of California. How about that? But how do you use it? Well, that is the question. The best advice I can offer is head to archive.org and dig in. One word of warning, while they do their very best to keep the archive clean and free of viruses or other things that you might not want children to see, you should have your guards up and watch what links you click on. I personally have never had an issue, but it makes sense to be careful. I hope that answers your question, Maria, and thank you for listening to the show. Now here is a message from Audible. Today's podcast is being brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. They have over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, computer, Kindle. Whatever you have, you can listen to Audible on it. So, what am I listening to right now? A Man Called Noon, narrated by Stephen Mendel. This book is a classic Louis L'Amour Western in every sense of the word. In one swift moment, a fall wiped away his memory. All he knew for certain was that someone wants him dead, and that he better find out why. All he has is his name, mad skills with a gun, and a map to $500,000 in buried gold. Was the treasure his? Is he a thief? A killer? He doesn't have any of the answers, but he needs to find them soon. If you've never read a Louis L'Amour novel, then this is a great place for you to start. And you can have this book today. Here's what Audible has set up for us. Audible is offering a free audiobook and 30 days to give you the opportunity to check out their service. To download your free audiobook, go to audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. Again, that's audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. And you can get your copy of A Man Called Noon today. Thank you, Audible. And now it's time for your stories.
These are your stories, sent by you, for you.
Well, as I mentioned in the introduction, we're going to be doing a special These Are Your Stories this time, because we have the man of the hour, the guy that has more stories than anyone I know and knows how to tell them, Jason Dowd. How you doing, Jason?
I'm good, Ron.
Hey, thanks for doing this. Now, I know what you said. You said, but Ron, I don't know anything about dogmen. Is that true? You really don't know anything about the dogman?
Until you actually wrote to me and told me about that, I did not know they existed. And that's what's really cool, because doing stuff like this, you get to see things that you didn't expect and you didn't know about. And this is where you learn and grow.
Well, let me give you a little background about the Dogman and where this whole came about. One of our listeners, Omar Quadri, sent me some information that I kind of said, I've heard of them, but I need to do some research. And so this whole thing came about from Omar Quadri. And secondly, I didn't even know it at the time, but I had in my list of stories that are waiting to come onto the air, I found 2 stories about dogmen. And I thought, wonderful. So I'm going to put all this together, and here we are. So before we get to those stories, let me give you a brief background of just what the dogman is. The beast has been spotted in 38 of the 50 U.S. states. The first documented report was in 1887 in Wexford County, Michigan. The creature is described as 7 feet tall, blue or amber-eyed, canine-like legs and head, and the torso of a man. They are known for their fearsome howl that sounds like a cross between human and wolf. Quite terrifying. Despite the vast number of sightings, actual dogman attacks are thought to be quite rare. Less than 1% of the eyewitnesses that have shared their encounters have been attacked by the dogman. Compare that to Bigfoot, in which over half the cases have resulted in some sort of aggressive action. Theories suggest that Bigfoot and dogmen are competitors. One documented case in Michigan reported open warfare between the two. This resulted in the end of Bigfoot sightings in that area. Now, I tried to track that story down and I couldn't find any written record of it, so it really is hearsay. If anyone has a link to that story, please let me know. There are three main theories of just what dogmen are. A, they're extraterrestrial. B, they're supernatural. Or C, nature's concoction. A hybrid, if you will. Many believe that dogmen are simply the American version of the European werewolf. So, pretty amazing thing. They are definitely out there. They are not as shy. They appear to be much more aggressive and violent towards animals. And we're talking horses, any livestock. They go after it in a pretty big way, and they're a real problem. And a lot of people are getting nervous about what is going on with these dogmen. So what do you think, Jason? Do you think that it's possible that it's expanding into the United States?
It's quite possible. I mean, every day there's a chance of finding something out there that we just don't even know exists. I mean, look what we found at the bottom of the ocean. So it could literally just be a animal. But on the other hand, it could be something a little bit more sinister than that. But I have a hard time believing, because it does have the body of a human. That would literally be like one of those half horse, half human things, which I don't think that exists.
Oh, centaurs? No, I don't.
Centaurs.
I don't think so.
I'm thinking that maybe it could be something a little bit more like an animal, that people are looking at it differently. Just because they're scared, things like that can really open up your eyes to see things that's not really there if you are a little bit more terrified on something, and it can blow your perspective out of perspective. But on the other hand, there is a good chance that this could really exist and be exactly what it says. Has anybody ever caught any pictures of these things or video cameras of them?
Yes, not only that, but in Montana, they have shot them. And there's been bodies. Yeah. And the thing about these is that when you get them, they look like normal wolves, but the paws are slightly different. And it's a bigger paw, and you could see where actually these things could walk on their hind legs a little easier than, let's say, an actual wolf could. So maybe a hybrid wolf of some sort. Hybrid meaning a man-made creature nature-made. Let's call it nature-made. Let's call it nature's concoction of two types of animals coming together to form something completely different. Maybe even take a big step out there and say, this is weird, but Bigfoot and wolf? Yeah.
I mean, we don't technically know what Bigfoot is.
Yeah, exactly.
We can't say that it's human. We can't say that it's animal.
Yeah.
So, that's a good possibility.
Well, there are three main theories. One, extraterrestrial. One, that they are supernatural, or they are some sort of nature's concoction. I'm definitely in the school of thought of nature's concoction. That's what I think.
That makes the most sense out of what we've read. I don't know if I would go as far as to say it was extraterrestrial, because it just doesn't seem to match some of those characteristics from the descriptions. But I think you're right on that one. I think it is possibly a nature's concoction.
Which would explain why they're expanding and moving into different states. And they're not that hard to see. Go to the internet and you can see movies, pictures, dead carcasses. Unlike any other cryptid we've ever seen, that has not been the case.
Right.
There is one last theory. And again, this is a supernatural, is that the dogmen are simply the American version of the European werewolf. I don't know about that.
Yeah, I don't even know if a werewolf would technically exist. I mean, we do know that vampires actually kind of do exist. They just may not exist in the way that they're portrayed in the movies. We do know that there's mummies. We do know that there's a lot of these other things out there. And we do know that they actually tried to make a Frankenstein. But as far as the werewolf, I've never actually seen somebody be bitten by something and turn into a werewolf and come back out of it. So I don't know if that would be the most logical explanation for this.
I agree. So let's just say at this point, we don't know, but both of us agree, which is a rare thing, that these are definitely some sort of nature's concoction, most likely.
Now, what I think would be really interesting, if they actually have bodies with it, why aren't they doing some type of scientific research on it where they dissect it, see what it's made out of, see what the DNA is brought up to be, stuff like that?
I don't have an answer for that. All I can really say is that there are pictures. If you go to the internet and type in Dogman, Montana, you can actually see the pictures that I'm talking about. And to me, they look really a lot like wolves, but I don't know. Like so many other cryptids, what can we really say about Bigfoot, aliens, ghosts, any of it? All we can say is we don't have the answers. Or in most cases, we don't have all of the answers.
Right.
But what I do have, Jason, is why I wanted to put this segment into These Are Your Stories. Because right now, everybody's out there going, where are the stories?
Good point.
So I do have, like I mentioned, I had 2 people send in stories that relate to dogmen. And maybe change your view, or maybe it'll change mine. Who knows?
All right. You want me to read one and you read one?
That'd be great.
I do have the stories here with you and you don't have to do all the work.
That sounds great. Do you want to read listener story 1 or do you want to read listener story number 2?
I'm going to go with listener story number 1.
All right. I'll read listener story number 2. Jason, take it away.
All right. It says, hello, Ron. I heard you asking for creepy stories. Well, here's mine. I never saw it, but in 1975, I was newly married, about 21 years old, and had a small baby. My sister, who was a teenager, was visiting us. My husband, my sister, and I had all gone to our bedrooms to settle down and go to sleep. I would say it was around midnight. We were just starting to relax and get sleepy when out of nowhere, there was this horrible, loud howl yell. I mean, it was so loud, it made my chest vibrate and my ears hurt. That's horrifying to hear that kind of stuff. The sound was not human, but it was guttural human-like sound, mixed with what sounded like a wolf. We were living in a mobile home at the time, and it howled just outside the back door in a hallway near our bedroom. We jumped out of bed, looked at each other, and both said at the same time, what the heck was that? My husband was 10 years older than I was and an avid hunter. He wasn't the kind of guy to scare easily. His face drained of color. My sister came running down the hallway, white as a ghost, and said, what was that? I told her I didn't know. My husband said he was getting his rifle and grabbed it out of the closet. He opened up the back door and yelled out into the wind, you better get the out of here or I will blow your head off. He listened a moment before I yelled at him to please shut the door. Next came the shadow in the window. I will never forget the chill I felt because that beast had to be at least 7 feet tall with a wolf's head. As quickly as it came, the shadow vanished. Needless to say, we stayed up all night, afraid to go to sleep. I had never forgotten that howl. There is no way it was a dog or coyotes. I have heard both howl. Also, it wasn't a guy joking around either. It was so loud, there was no way a human could have made that sound. I love your show, and I'm glad to be a part of it. Sue Baker from Manistee County, Michigan.
Well, Jason, what do you think of that one?
I got to say, that's got to be quite horrifying. And I think the thing that makes it more horrifying is that they were in a mobile home.
Oh,
because those things are only about 2 inches thick or less, maybe even an inch or 3/4 inch thick to the walls. So, I mean, if there's something that big out there, that would have been nothing to get inside that wall.
What I want to say about this story is that it checks all the boxes. Everything that I read, were the signatures of the dogmen are part of this story. And I got to say, something like that, I mean, that even sounds worse than Bigfoot. Like you said, number one, a trailer. But number two, to be right outside the window and see a shadow of a wolf head?
Yeah.
And it could have all been a joke, but that doesn't explain the howl.
No, it does not. Unless they took something and amplified it somehow to make it sound even louder than it was.
Well, that's an elaborate prank, but it could be that. It certainly could.
See, that's the type of prank I pull on people. I go big or go home.
Oh, man, you're a mean guy. I had no idea.
I am.
All right. Well, I want to thank you, Sue, for your story. It is definitely out there, and definitely thank you. And I personally don't think it was a joke. I think you saw something.
No, I think she did too.
All right. Are we ready for listener story number 2?
Yes, please.
All right. This story comes from Parts Unknown, sent in by SWwatch 336. Don't ask me what that means because I couldn't track it down. If you are the owner of this story, please let me know so that I can give your name actual credit. This happened to me when I was 10 or 11. I'm just about 20 now, but I'll never forget what happened that day. I was at my grandparents' house who were watching me for the day. They lived out in a mixture of farmlands and woods in rural Wisconsin. Their yard is mostly surrounded by farmland, but to the right side of the yard is a couple acres of woods and swamp. Why does there always have to be swamp?
I know, right?
It was a really hot, muggy morning in July. I was standing out on the deck shooting some cans with my BB gun. All of a sudden, I got the sense that something was wrong. I felt like I was being watched. I started scanning the tree line, and down the edge of the trees, about 60 yards away by the swamp woods, was this thing standing I can only describe as Dogman. It was about 7 feet tall, covered with shaggy hair, and had the classic Dogman face, long snout, pointed ears on the top of the head, yellow eyes, and it was very muscular. It was standing on 2 legs, but it appeared to be sort of leaning up against a tree. We locked eyes, and it was probably only 10 seconds, but it felt like hours. It sounds silly, but the thing had a sinister grin on its face. It was extremely intimidating. I knew that thing wanted to kill me, and it easily could have done that. I could relive this encounter now, at my age, with a shotgun instead of a BB gun, and still be just as terrified as I was then. It definitely had a very negative, sinister vibe to it. After locking eyes with the thing, it just bolted off on 2 legs through some of the swamp and emerged further down the tree line, and then ran off into the forest. At first, I thought it might have been one of my older cousins playing a joke on me who lived nearby, but then I realized there's no way they could be wearing a suit that was 7 feet tall and clear the swamp as fast as they just did. I wasn't going to tell Grandma and Grandpa I saw a werewolf down by the swamp. They'd never believe me. So I kept my mouth shut and tried to carry on with my day. Well, later that afternoon, I was talking to my aunt, and she brought up the fact that she'd heard some strange noises the night before. When I asked her what they sounded like, she said it was a lot of snarling and growling. I broke down and told them my story. They not only believed me, but said that they had seen the beast as well. Sent in to us by, what we're going to say, SWwatch 336. Well, Jason, what do you think?
That's pretty incredible. And when you were reading that, I could picture exactly what it looked like. I could see it like I was right there with him in his own eyes as he was watching that. It was very well written and detailed. But you know what? I think the most important part about this entire story is not necessarily seeing the Dogman, but that he actually decided to tell the story and everybody believed him. The reason being is that he could have gone on like I was for years after I saw my first ghost, thinking that I was insane. And he actually said something and they saw it too. So I think this is why I think we need to be a little bit more open when we see things that we don't quite understand or things that scare us, because you never know what they believe and what they don't believe. Some of them are going to completely come out and say, you're crazy. But sometimes they might surprise you.
Well, again, I'm going to say about this one is it checks all the boxes.
Mm-hmm.
And it also alluded to the fact that the thing could run on 4 legs.
Yeah.
Which again leads us back to concoction. Nature's own new creature that is, well, it's been around since the 1800s, but is making an uptick now, the population is starting to grow. And I think that's what we're looking at here. I think that the Dogmen are a form of creature that is on the uptick. And we better watch out, if you ask me.
Yeah.
If they get enough of them, we might not win.
As you were reading that story and as we've been talking about this, it brought me back to one of the photos I shot, which was Little Red Riding Hood, where I actually hired a wolf to be a part of the shoot, because obviously it made it a little bit more believable when you have an actual wolf to interact with. Now, this wolf was a baby wolf now. I'm telling you, it was not very old, maybe not even a year old. And when it stood up, literally, it was just about mid-thigh of her, and it was going to get bigger. So she was about 5'6", something like that, and she had on some actual high heels, which made her a little bit higher too. Now, when this dog came up, it jumped up on me and put its paws on my shoulder, and I was looking at it eye to eye. I'm 5'8". So can you imagine, if this thing is able to stand on its hind legs, and that wasn't even pushing itself all the way up, let's just say it goes an extra 2 inches or 3 inches, it's almost 6 feet right there.
Oh, you've got a great point.
So if this is just a slightly bigger wolf and it's able to do that, like, I have a little dog now, her name's Luna. She can sit on her butt like a prairie dog for untold times. Why couldn't they do that too? It could just be a slight mutation and have a bigger wolf than what we're expecting.
Jason, that's a great point. I never really thought about that. We used to raise collies when I was a kid. We had it's sometimes up to 17 collies here. And you're right. They can easily put their legs on your shoulders and look you right in the eye.
Yeah.
That's not even a stretch for them. I think you've hit something there, Jason. I really do.
And I actually was with a real wolf. It was 99.9% real wolf. So when that thing stood up and looked at me straight in the eye, that was a baby. It was going to get a little bit taller, and it was going to get a little bit bigger and huskier as it got older. So
easily 7 feet, most likely.
Most likely, yes. And then you look at the Mastiffs and like the, the Great Danes. Great Danes come up to almost the mid of my chest. If they were to stand up, they would easily be bigger than I am. So.
Oh, yeah. I think you've solved Dogman, and I don't think we need to study this anymore.
I wish it was that easy.
Well, Jason, thanks for being with us today. I really appreciate it. I just wanted to have somebody along with me when I was telling these stories. I guess I didn't want to do them alone.
Well, I can see why they're horrifying.
And who do you bring along to a horrifying story?
Somebody loves horror.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for coming, Jason. We'll see you on the next Horror Express when we have one. Probably, I'm thinking mid-February, late February, somewhere around there.
Yep. Time to get back on that train.
All right. Well, thank you, Jason. It has been a pleasure to have you.
Absolutely.
These Are Your Stories this time were brought to you by Gladys Goodies. Good treats for your dog to eat. And here is Jason to tell you all about it.
Hi everyone, I am Jason Dowd, president of Gladys Goodies, and Gladys is my dachshund, and I am excited to tell you that if you go to our website, GladysGoodies.com, and use the promo code RONS, that's RONS, you will get 25% off your entire order. These treats are all natural with low fat, no artificial flavors, chemicals, byproducts, preservatives, sodium, or anything else that will harm your fur friend. We take great pride in our products, and you will see it once you try some. So go to GladysGoodies.com, that's GladysGoodies.com, and don't forget to use the promo code RON to get that discount. And while you're there, pick your doggy up some swag too. You'll be glad you did, and thanks for listening to this amazing podcast of Ron's Amazing Stories.
That's it this time for These Are Your Stories. Do you have a story that you want to tell on the show? If you do, we want to hear it. It can be about any subject and from any genre. To submit your story, just head to ronsamazingstories.com and click on the story submission banner. Fill out the form and soon your story will be heard. Do you have a story but don't want to write it? That's okay too. Just leave your contact information, a brief description of your story, and I'll get back to you. We will write it together. However, if you don't do it, your story remains just that, your story. Why not make it our story? Our featured story for this week comes from the pages of Astounding Magazine, July 1931. We continue with the science fiction tale, The Diamond Thunderbolt. Last time we were introduced to Professor Norman Prescott and his guide, Jack Stoddard, official geologist and crack mountaineer. Stoddard found something on that Himalayan mountain that no one expected. an incredible storehouse of diamonds, a madman, and his crew of Yeti-like creatures. We continue now with part 2 of the Diamond Thunderbolt, read for us by James White.
The Diamond Thunderbolt by H. Thompson Rich, Part 2. It was a story as dramatic and romantic as it was unscrupulous. Finding himself and the crew of the rocket marooned on the upper slopes of this mighty mountain in the midst of an incalculable wealth, he had set about at once to capitalize their astounding discovery. First, he had made certain adjustments to the mechanism of his apparatus, which fortunately had not been injured by its forced landing, and then he had taken off with specimens of the treasure, bringing the craft down this time with precision in the midst of his ancestral estates near Baku, in the foothills of the Caucasus Mountains. This vast property the Bolsheviks had not confiscated, partly because of its remoteness, no doubt, and partly because of the prince's services to the Soviet Republic. At any rate, it was here he had developed in secret the details of his amazing plot, a plot that had as its aim not only his own enrichment, but the rehabilitation of all the Russian nobles. Once they had heard his story of the Diamond Thunderbolt and seen the specimens he showed them, many had eagerly joined the plot, with the result that an international ring had been formed for disposal of the gems. His plans perfected, Prince Krasnov had then returned to Kinchinjunga with his rocket, since when the mysterious flood of those perfect diamonds into the jewel markets of the world had begun. So you see, my friends, he smiled, that is what you Americans would call my little game, a game your chance discovery has rather jeopardized, you must admit. Professor Prescott could well realize this, but at a glance from Stoddard he declined to admit it. A very ingenious game, he said, but where do the llamas figure in this? Surely they must know of the presence of this meteor within their kingdom. No doubt they do, the prince conceded. This is why they are so reluctant to have foreigners enter their domain. At one time, I am satisfied, they knew its exact location and drew many of their own gems from that source. But in recent times, the snow people have guarded their secret well. The llamas are as terrified of them as the natives, and with better reason. He did not mention what the reason was, but there was something ominous in his tone. But to get on with my story, friends, I am not telling you all this merely to satisfy your curiosity. I have what you call a motive in my madness. Madness was right, thought Stoddard. The man was dangerously, criminally mad. My motive is simply this, he went on. You have chanced upon my little nest egg, and consequently I have either to let you in on the deal, or... Krasnov paused, shrugged. But why talk of anything unpleasant when there is wealth enough here for all? What I propose briefly is that you join me. They knew it was coming, but they winced nevertheless. Oh, don't be premature, he exclaimed, a little nettled. Hear me out. What is good enough for me and my fellow nobles of Imperial Russia is surely good enough for poor underpaid professors of democratic America. Listen, friends, I am generous. Join me and we will make millionaires out of all of you. Every professor in your country shall be a little czar. It will be, to use the old phrase, a triumph of the intellect. Beyond a doubt, the man was mad, yet his madness was vast, dizzying. Though neither was tempted, they were both rendered speechless for a moment. It was like standing on a mountaintop and being shown the countries and the glories of the world, like standing on the top of Kinchinjunga, thought Prescott. But you assume we are all Bolsheviks like yourself, we professors, he said, struggling for calm words. Bolsheviks? Snorted the prince. I spit on them. You think I, a nobleman, am interested in the masses? Cattle. Swine. I plan only for the day when we who are worthy rule again, and this that I have told you is my plan. You can, as you Americans so coarsely say, Either take it or leave it." A tension hung in the air as his words echoed into silence. The man had revealed himself. "And suppose we leave it?" asked the professor, restraining his irritation as best he could. "What then?" "Then I am afraid, unpleasant consequences would result," was the bland answer. "Surely you realize that I could not let you and young Dr. Stoddard rejoin your expedition with this story to report." They realized it quite well. "But suppose we agree not to report it," said Professor Prescott. "Not to doubt your honesty of intention," replied Krasnov sharply. "I would refuse to accept such an agreement." "Then I see nothing else but to decline your kind proposal," said Stoddard, before the professor could formulate further words. "What do you propose to do? Murder us?" "Nothing so personal," said the prince, with his sardonic smile. "I shall merely turn you over to my little subjects. They no doubt will deal with you as your merits warrant." Whereupon he pressed a button under that elaborate teakwood table. The musical gong they had heard before sounded again, and the prince's 2 Cossack retainers reappeared. He addressed them briefly in Russian, adding to his guests, "Adieu, friends. If you change your minds, you have only to speak. You will be understood, and I shall be gratified." And without further words, they were led from that ornate apartment. Taken back to the dazzling chamber under the meteor, they were turned over to the pygmies. A powwow resulted, but it was brief. The 2 captives were bound fast in a curious ceremonial pit near the center of the room. Then the midget horde withdrew, leaving them alone there under that eerie glow. "Now what the devil will be the next step?" queried Stoddard, when the last of the pygmies had gone. Professor Prescott considered for a moment before replying. "I don't think there will be any next step, except our cremation," he said at length. "Cremation?" gasped his young friend. "What do you mean, cremation?" Another pause. Then, "Just this. Don't you see where we are? Right under the Thunderbolt." "Well?" "Well, what?" "Simple enough, Jack." The professor's tone was grave. "When dawn comes and the rising sun strikes that—" "Good God!" Stoddard suddenly understood. "Why, we'll be cooked alive, frizzled." It was only too true. Even now, the pale rays of the moon, concentrated by the myriad facets of that monumental diamond, were beginning to focus on them a warmth that was uncomfortable. And by morning, the 2 men crouched there silent, realizing their desperate plight. They must escape before the sun rose. But how? Studying their bonds, they discovered that they were of rawhide of some sort, obviously from the hides of animals these strange people caught on the lower slopes somewhere. But though they strained and twisted, they could not stretch them, the leather evidently having been cured to a marvelous toughness in these high altitudes. Precious minutes ticked by as they struggled there, but they were unable to extricate themselves. But before the end of a half hour, Stoddard managed to free one arm, and reaching into his jacket, he drew forth a small, compact metal object, his cigarette lighter. Twirling the wheel while Professor Prescott held his breath, he succeeded in kindling a flame on its tiny wick. If only he could reach the thongs with it. If only he could burn them through and free himself and the professor before any of the pygmies re-entered that lethal chamber. Wrenching around now, he applied the flame to his left wrist, which was still bound. As the living fire touched his flesh, he winced with pain. But almost anything was better than the grisly fate that threatened. Slowly, a little at a time, he endured the torture, straining at each application to see if the thongs would yield. "Here, let me try it once," called out Professor Prescott as he cried aloud with the agony of the ordeal. "No, I'll get it." Stoddard gritted his teeth. Continued. "There, I think my hand is free." He struggled, Yes. Now, wait. Replacing his cigarette lighter in his pocket, he drew his blistered wrist from its smoldering bonds and struggled feverishly now to undo the lashes about his feet. 5 minutes of that, and he suddenly flung them off and stood up. Now then, Professor, I'll have you loose in a jiffy. Bending over his fettered companion, he worked with frantic haste to untie the rawhide bonds. Another 5 minutes, and they were both free. Professor Prescott stood up and stretched. Thank God for small favors, he exclaimed. But you, Jack, you must be burned cruelly. Forget it. Stoddard was already wrapping a handkerchief around his wrist. Now, let's see about getting out of here. These little rats all seem to be asleep, and Lord knows where that maniac Krasnov is. Perhaps we can make it. At any rate, we'll give them a run for their money. As he spoke, he drew his automatic. Silently, stealthily, they left that glittering chamber and proceeded down the cavern toward what seemed to be the entrance, guided by the remembrance of the way they had come. 100 yards or more they made, seeing no sign of their captors, when suddenly a musical gong rang out. "We've stepped on one of Krasnov's infernal signals," cried Stoddard above the din. "Now there'll be hell to pay." And hell to pay there was, almost instantly. For before they had taken 10 more steps, the cavern ahead was full of small ghostly figures jabbering in their shrill voices. Indifferent now of what he did, their lives at stake, Stoddard blazed away with his automatic, sweeping it from side to side of the stony walls as he fired. As the shots crashed out, the jabbers turned to shrieks of terror. Several of the pygmies fell. The rest broke their ranks and shrank into the shadows. "Run!" yelled Stoddard, slipping a new clip into his pistol. The professor needed no invitation. Gathering his long legs, he sped after the younger man, and together they burst from the mouth of the cavern. Outside, in the dazzle of moonlight, they paused for an instant. "This way," called Stoddard, racing toward that splintered arena. They gained it and lunged across it to the shelving slope that reached upward to the narrow, perilous ridge whence they had come. As they proceeded, the pygmy horde following with incredible swiftness, Stoddard wheeled and fired time and again, and now his shots were answered by the reports of rifles. "Krasnov and his Cossacks," he muttered. "Well, we'll give them our heels, unless they hit us." "And Russians are notoriously bad shots, I understand," panted the professor. At any rate, they reached the slope and struggled upward toward the ridge, putting themselves presently out of range behind the jagged rocks that loomed on every side. But just as they were congratulating themselves on their escape, came a dull, reverberating explosion, and as they clung to their insecure footholds, a volcano of snow and ice rose ahead. Thousands of tons of debris avalanched into the chasm below. Stunned, deafened, they looked around. Down in that pocket where the Thunderbolt had so recently gleamed was one vast chaos, and above, where that razorback ridge had led across the intervening chasms to safety, was a dazzling void. To both came the same thought, but Stoddard expressed it first. "Krasnov! He's dynamited the ridge," he gasped. "Then we'll never get back now," echoed Professor Prescott. "No, but they'll never get us here. Scant comfort, though, when we're pinioned here like a couple of birds with their wings clipped. Right, but let's see. Let's figure. We're better off than we were. And what was it Napoleon once said? When you can't retreat, advance. So suppose but listen." Stoddard heard. It was the sound of rifle shots, and looking down he saw a feverish activity surrounding the rocket. Myriads of the pygmies were swarming upon it, while a handful of Cossacks were holding them off. "Something doing down there, all right," he muttered. "Looks to me like—" Why, sure, I've got it. That madman has overshot himself for once. He's buried their precious meteor in blowing up our ridge, and they've turned on him." "I think you're right," agreed Professor Prescott. "Suppose we advance as you say. It looks like a chance." "Right," said Stoddard. Slowly, cautiously, they returned down the slope. When within 100 yards, they knew they had sized up the situation correctly. With frantic speed, Krasnov was supervising the shoveling out of his rocket from amid the debris, was directing its loading, while the free members of his crew held off the enraged natives who were obstructing them. Descending even more cautiously now, they neared the scene of activity. "My plan is this: to get aboard and find out where they're going," said Stoddard through shut teeth. "What do you say?" "Lead on," said the professor. So they continued down, neared the resting place of that strange craft, and under shelter of the moonlight shadows stole through the confused ranks surrounding it and crept aboard. Stowing themselves into the first likely niche that offered, a narrow cubicle behind a flight of metal stairs, they waited, scarcely daring to breathe for fear of being discovered. 15 minutes passed, a half hour, when suddenly sounded a rasping of doors that told them the rocket was being sealed. Then came a roar, as of some mighty blast beating down upon the frozen earth, followed by a lifting, rushing sensation, and they were flung violently to the floor. The pressure ceased in a moment, however, to be supplanted by a buoyant, exhilarating sense of flight. It increased, and they judged that they must be traveling at great speed. Glancing at the luminous dial of his watch, Professor Prescott saw that it was 9:15. "Well, we're off," he whispered. "And where, would you guess, are we headed?" "I wouldn't guess," Stoddard whispered back. "From the way we're riding, it might be Mars. We must be making hundreds of miles an hour. Or thousands. Who knows?" They crouched there in their cramped niche, scarcely even whispering now as the tense minutes passed. Suddenly the motion changed. They seemed to be dropping. Another moment or two, and with a slight jar, the rocket came to rest. "Well, we're here, wherever it is," said Stoddard, stirring. "Yes, undoubtedly," the professor agreed. "And the next move? I think we'll let them make that." They were not long in doing so. There came the sound of doors rasping open, of footsteps echoing on metal stairs and corridors. Once a giant Cossack passed, within 4 feet of them. But at length, all was silent within the rocket. "Now then, suppose we have a look around," said Stoddard, stepping out. "Right," agreed his companion, following. "I'll admit I am mildly curious to know what corner of the earth we've been transported to." They proceeded down the dim-lit corridor the way they had come, descended a flight of stairs, and headed along another corridor, to pause suddenly and gasp with astonishment. For through the door whence they had entered the rocket poured a flood of sunshine. Stoddard stared at it a moment incredulously, and then glanced at his watch. 10 o'clock, I make it, he muttered. "Am I crazy or what?" "No, I hardly think so," smiled Professor Prescott, recovering from his own surprise. "It is merely that we are in some part of the world quite a few thousand miles removed from India. Back on Kinchinjunga, it is still 10 o'clock at night, but here it is quite obviously daytime." "That must be the explanation," Stoddard agreed, "but it certainly gave me a start at first." Approaching the door, followed by the professor, he peered cautiously out to confront a desolate stretch of scrubby growth hemmed in by a background of rugged mountains. "Now where the devil would you say we are?" he demanded, gazing around perplexedly. "Either in the United States or in Mexico," was the astonishing reply. "But how can you say that?" "Because it must be some place approximately 12 hours distant from India in time, to judge from the sun, which is not far past the meridian." "But why not Australia, for instance?" Because Australia is too far. It would be 3 o'clock tomorrow morning there, since it is 10 o'clock last night now in India. Stoddard pondered this a minute, then admitted its correctness. All right, then. Assuming that we are somewhere on the North American continent, the next thing is to give Krasnov the slip. Otherwise, it won't be big enough for all of us. And that Professor Prescott conceded readily enough. But before making any further move, they looked over their surroundings carefully, to satisfy themselves none of their late captors were in view. They are evidently somewhere on the other side of the rocket, Stoddard concluded at length. So let's make a break for it while we've got the chance. Lead the way, said the professor. Okay, here we go. And stepping through the door, they dropped to the ground and raced off under the glare of the burning sun toward the rugged mountains that loomed ahead. For 100 yards or so, they were able to keep the rocket between themselves and the Russians, but soon the ground sloped up to such an extent that they realized they must be in full view. Dropping behind the scant shelter of a scraggly tree, they turned and glanced down, and there, beyond the rocket, they could now see a group of men standing around outside a small wooden shack, shouting and gesticulating in their direction. "Damn it, they've seen us," muttered Stoddard. "But why don't they come after us?" queried Professor Prescott. The answer came even as he spoke, for out of the shack rushed the tall figure of the prince. In his hand, a pair of binoculars which he raised to his eyes. Whether or not he spotted them, an instant later he turned and uttered a command, and 2 huge Cossacks sprang to the pursuit. "There's nothing to do now but run for it," cried Stoddard, leaping to his feet. The professor followed, and they plunged on up the slope, bullets from their pursuers' pistols and the rifles of those below kicking up the dust around them. But either because the aim was bad or the targets difficult, they escaped unscathed. As for Stoddard, he wasted no time in firing back. "Once we get in those mountains, we're safe," he gasped, as they struggled on. "How are you, Professor? All right?" "No holes in my skin so far," came the panting answer. 5 desperate, dodging minutes passed. Glancing over their shoulders, they saw that the heavy, stolid Cossacks were losing ground, and ahead, tauntingly near now, loomed a thickly wooded slope that meant the beginning of big timber and safety. Another 5 minutes, each second an hour, and they had gained it. But there was no pausing yet. They could hear the Cossacks crashing on like determined bloodhounds behind. "No need to climb any more," exclaimed Stoddard, half breathless. "We'll edge along, keep in the trees, and try to throw them off." The older man said nothing, merely gritted his teeth. This climb had told on him more than anything he had experienced on the cruel slopes of Kinchinjunga. As they struggled along now, sometimes it seemed that they had thrown their pursuers off the trail, or completely outdistanced them. But always a moment later, they would hear again the crunch of the Cossacks' boots on the dry undergrowth. So the grim flight continued, mile after heart-tearing mile, and Stoddard was beginning to realize that the professor couldn't keep on much longer, had just about decided to stop and shoot it out with their pursuers when suddenly there came a sound that brought new hope to him. "Did you hear that?" he gasped, pausing. "It sounded like a car," panted his companion. "Right, and that means there must be a road through here somewhere. But where? Listen." Professor Prescott pointed to the left. "The sound seems to be coming from over there." And sure enough, from the left came a wheezing grind of a car making a heavy grade. "Near, too," decided Stoddard. "Come on, let's go. We've got to head it off. It's our only hope, except—" With relief, he shoved his automatic back into its holster and led the way in the direction of the now rapidly nearing car. 100 yards they had made, up a slight rise, when there spread before them a rutted mountain road, and on it, in full view, was a laboring Ford of ancient vintage. Over the wheel hovered a lanky, leathery native, and beside him sat a small, plump woman who looked as though she might be his wife. They were almost to the top of the hill when Stoddard hailed them. "Say," he said, "give us a ride, will you? We're lost." "Keep on, Henry," he heard the woman urge. "I don't like the looks of 'em." Americans. Well, thought Stoddard, they were in the United States anyway. That was something. And he didn't exactly blame the good woman for her suspicions. They must look pretty wild at that, with their 2-day beards and tattered clothes. "Sorry," spoke up Henry. "Mrs. says no. She knows best. Besides, it ain't fur to Martin's Bluff. You can make it in an hour." "But say, wait a minute." They were running along beside the wheezing car now. "We've got to get there in a hurry. We'll pay you." Henry pricked up his ears at this, but his wife shook her head. "Keep on," she urged. "They may be bandits." Whereupon Stoddard drew his automatic, for there was no more time to argue. "Stop," he commanded. "You'll take us, understand? I'll pay you well." "See? I was right," screamed the woman. "Bandits! Bandits! Oh, Henry, save me!" Wildly, she clung to him as Stoddard mounted the running board. But before he could make another move, Professor Prescott gasped out, "The Cossacks! Quick!" And jumping down, he wheeled to face the 2 leering Russians, not 40 feet down the road. Pistols leveled, they were advancing stolidly. Stoddard half raised his own weapon, then turned to see if the car was within range of the return fire it would bring. It was, but not for long. With a furious chattering of bands, as Henry gave it the gas, the decrepit vehicle gained the top of the hill and disappeared from view down the far slope. And the last thing he saw of it was a dusty plate flapping under its tail light. It was a Texas license. Then, turning back, he lifted his automatic, but it was too late. The Cossacks were on them. In answer to a guttural command, he dropped the weapon and raised his hands, as the professor had already done.
Well, how about that? Our heroes got to fly in a rocket, but not to another planet. They found themselves now trapped by the evil Cossacks in Texas. That is the end of part 2. Come back next week for the conclusion to The Diamond Thunderbolt by H. Thompson Rich. Hey, I think we just finished episode number 421. How about that? I want to thank Maria Abbott, Omar Quadri, Sue Baker, SWwatch 336, and of course our good friend, Jason Dowd. If you want to follow the podcast or the blog, just head to ronsamazingstories.com. There you will find an amazing number of links that should fit every need. Do you want to help the show? The best thing you can do is to tell your friends all about it. And please leave reviews or feedback wherever you listen. This is what makes podcasts grow. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come again to find out what are Ron's Amazing Stories.